She called me an opportunist in front of everyone and said my father's memory belonged to her. She thought I would crumble. She had no idea I was about to uncover the secret she'd buried for 20 years. The smell of sawdust is the first thing I remember and the last thing I notice at the end of a long day. It's the smell of work, of progress, of something real taking shape under my own two hands. My workshop isn't much, a converted garage behind the house I grew up in, but it's mine. The air hangs thick with the scent of pine and oak, a kind of incense for the working man. Most days, that smell is a comfort. Today, it feels like it's choking me. My eyes kept drifting from the half-finished cabinet on my workbench to the piece of paper lying next to my sander. It was a third notice bill from my lumber supplier, the words past due stamped in an angry red. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. It was the same knot I felt every time I looked at the business's bank account, a familiar dread that tasted like failure. I picked up a block of scrap wood, the grain smooth against my calloused palm. I squeezed it, my knuckles turning white, and a memory flickered behind my eyes, as sharp and unwelcome as a splinter. I'm 5 years old. My father is in this same garage, trying to build me a little wooden car. He's not a patient man. The wood splits, the nail bends, and with a curse, he throws the whole mess across the room. It shatters against the concrete wall. He doesn't look at me. He just turns and walks away, out of the garage, out of the house, out of my life. That was the last thing he ever tried to build for me. My own hands, I thought, looking down at them. They were rough, scarred in places, permanently stained with wood finish. But they didn't give up. They finished the job. It was an obsession, a quiet, desperate vow I'd made to myself without ever saying the words aloud. I would not be him. I would not be a man who walked away from things that got hard. Caleb, her voice cut through the memory, soft but steady. My grandmother stood in the doorway, a tall glass of iced tea in her hand, condensation beating on its surface. She was in her 70s, her hair the color of spun silver, but her eyes were as clear and sharp as they'd always been. She was the one constant in my life, the North Star to my wavering compass. "Thought you could use this," she said, setting the glass on a clear spot on the bench. "You've been out here since dawn. Just finishing up," I lied, forcing a smile. I took a long drink of the tea. It was sweet, the way she always made it, a small kindness that felt enormous. She didn't ask about the red stamped bill. She didn't have to. She saw the tension in my shoulders, the weariness in my eyes. She saw it all. She looked around the workshop, her gaze lingering on the sturdy shelves I'd built for her pantry last winter, the rocking chair I'd repaired for her just last month. This house, this workshop, they were built on the foundation she and my grandfather had laid, but I was the one holding the walls up now. And some days, the weight of it all felt like it was going to crush me. The fear wasn't just about money. It was about that ghost in the garage, the ghost of a man who couldn't finish a simple wooden toy. I was terrified that one day, I'd wake up and find out I was just like him after all. The last few years with Grandpa were a slow-motion blur of hospital corridors and a sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic that clung to our clothes. He'd been a quiet man, my grandfather. He taught me how to read a tape measure, how to respect the wood, how to let my work speak for itself. He showed his love not with words, but with a steady presence, a shared silence in the workshop that was more comforting than any conversation. Then the silence got quieter. The cancer that started in his lungs slowly stole his breath, his strength, his presence. The man who had once hoisted timber onto his shoulder could barely lift a glass of water. Each trip to the emergency room, each new medication, each hushed conversation with a doctor chipped away at him and at us. It chipped away at our savings, too. The insurance covered some, but never enough. I started taking on any job I could get, no matter how small or how low the pay. I worked weekends, nights, pushing myself until my muscles ached and my mind was numb, just to keep our heads above water. I'd come home late, covered in sawdust and exhaustion, and see Grandma at the kitchen table, a pile of medical bills spread out under the dim light like a losing hand of cards. She'd look up and force a smile, but I could see the cracks in her composure, the fine lines of worry etched deeper around her eyes. She never complained. Not once. She just got older, quieter. She took on extra cleaning jobs, her hands, already worn from a lifetime of work, becoming chapped and raw. The day we buried him, the sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. I stood by the grave, my suit feeling tight and foreign, and listened to the hollow sound of dirt hitting the coffin. I felt a profound emptiness, a gaping hole where his quiet strength used to be. But my grief was tangled with a bitter, simmering anger. Anger at the cancer, at the bills, at the sheer, grinding unfairness of it all. That evening, the house felt cavernous. Every room echoed with his absence. Grandma and I sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed out of the sky. We didn't talk for a long time. Then, she turned to me, her profile silhouetted against the fading light. "You know, Caleb," she began, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried a weight of iron. "For the longest time, I was just angry at your father for leaving. For leaving me and your mother to pick up the pieces, and then for leaving you for me and your grandpa to raise." She paused, taking a slow breath. "But I was wrong about what I was angriest about. I'm not angry at him for leaving." She turned her head, and her sharp eyes found mine in the twilight. They were glistening. "I'm angry at him because he made you spend your whole life wondering if you were worth staying for." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. She saw it. She saw the wound I'd kept hidden my entire life, the one that drove my obsession, my fear of failure. She knew the ghost I was fighting wasn't just my father, but the question he'd left branded on my soul. In that moment, I didn't feel like a 28-year-old man. I felt like that 5-year-old boy again, standing alone in a garage, staring at a broken wooden car. Life settled into a new, grim rhythm after Grandpa was gone. Work, bills, sleep. Repeat. The grief was a low hum beneath the surface of everything. But the financial pressure was a blaring alarm we couldn't ignore. The weight on my shoulders felt heavier than ever. I was the man of the house now, for whatever that was worth. It was my job to keep the lights on, to make sure Grandma could finally rest. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, figuring it was just another sales call. But for some reason, I picked it up. "Hello," I said, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. "Is this Caleb Morrow?" a woman's voice asked. It was crisp, professional, devoid of any warmth. "Yeah, this is him." "Who's this?" There was a slight pause. "My name is Brenda. I was your father's wife." The words hung in the air, alien and absurd. Father's wife. I hadn't heard from the man in 23 years. I didn't even know he'd gotten married. The name Brenda meant nothing to me. She was a ghost calling from a life I had no part in. My stomach went cold. "Okay," I said slowly, my voice flat. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this over the phone," she continued, her tone still strangely detached, like she was reading from a script. "But your father, he passed away. There was a car accident 2 days ago." I leaned against the workbench, my legs suddenly feeling unsteady. "Passed away." The man was dead. I waited for a feeling to hit me. Sadness, anger, relief, something. But there was nothing. Just a hollow, buzzing emptiness. "How do you mourn a man who is already a ghost?" "I see," I managed to say. "The funeral is on Friday," she said quickly. "But that's not the primary reason I'm calling. This is difficult, but our lawyer said it was best to be direct." I stayed silent. "Your father," she said, and I could hear a new edge in her voice, a tightening. "He didn't have a formal will. But he left behind considerable assets. And as his biological child, you technically have a claim." She said the word claim like it was something dirty. And then came the punch. "Caleb, I know you didn't have a relationship with him. He had a new life here. So, to make things easier for everyone, I was hoping you would agree to sign off on your inheritance rights. The estate is valued at about $1.5 million. $1.5 million. The number was so staggering, it didn't feel real. It was a lifeline. It was a solution to every single problem that kept me awake at night. And this woman, this stranger, was asking me to just let it go, to pretend it didn't exist. Not out of respect for his memory, but for her convenience. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for decades, snapped. The numbness vanished, replaced by a cold, clear rage. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like steel in my mouth. I'm sorry, she stammered, caught off guard. I said no. I repeated, my voice stronger now. I'm not signing off on anything. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the receiver, my knuckles white. Then I turned, picked up the block of scrap wood from the bench, and hurled it against the far wall of the workshop with all my strength. It didn't shatter. It just left a deep, angry dent in the drywall. The dent in the wall was a stark, physical reminder of the storm that had just blown into my life. I told Grandma about the call that evening. She listened patiently, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she just nodded slowly. Your grandfather always said that man was a coward, she said, her voice firm. But this woman, this is something else. This is predatory. She looked me straight in the eye. That is your birthright, Caleb, whether he earned the title of father or not. You will not let her steal it from you. Her strength was like a steel rod pressed against my spine. There was no hesitation. The next morning, I called my Uncle Mike. He was my grandmother's younger brother, a small-town lawyer with a reputation for being a no-nonsense straight shooter. He'd handled Grandpa's affairs, and he was the only person I trusted. I sat in his dusty office, surrounded by stacks of legal books, and laid out the whole story. He listened intently, making notes on a yellow legal pad. 1.5 million. No will, he murmured, tapping his pen on the desk. Under state law, as the only biological child, you're entitled to half. His spouse gets the other half. It's straightforward. Her asking you to waive your rights is audacious. She's going to fight it, isn't she? I asked. Mike leaned back in his chair. Like a cornered Wolverine, I imagine. This won't be clean. It'll cost money, and it'll take time. You sure you're up for it? I thought of the red stamp bill on my workbench. I thought of my grandmother's tired hands. I thought of the dent in my wall. I'm sure, I said. That night, my best friend Leo came by the workshop with a six-pack of beer. Leo and I had been friends since kindergarten, and he'd been my right hand when I started the business. He was loud, impulsive, and fiercely loyal. He saw the dent in the wall immediately. Whoa, what did the wall ever do to you? He asked, setting the beers down. I told him everything. He listened, his usual joking demeanor melting away into a hard-edged seriousness. So let me get this straight, he said when I was done, his voice low. The man who abandoned you dies, and his new wife calls you up, not to offer condolences, but to tell you to piss off so she can keep $1.5 million. That about sums it up, I said, taking a swig of beer. He was quiet for a moment, then he looked at me, his eyes blazing. You're going to bury her, Caleb. You hear me? You're going to take her to the cleaners. He paced back and forth in the small space. Dude, you can't just work this away. This isn't about the money anymore, is it? He stopped and pointed a finger at me. This is about that bastard finally paying for something. I didn't answer. I just took another drink. But he was right. My father had left a debt 23 years ago, a debt of responsibility, of fatherhood, of basic human decency. He had died without ever paying it. And now, this woman, Brenda, was trying to settle his account for him by erasing me completely. The battle lines were drawn. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was for my grandparents, for the life they gave me. It was for that 5-year-old boy who never understood why his dad left. And I wasn't going to lose. Against my better judgment, I decided to go to the funeral. Uncle Mike advised against it, calling it a needless provocation. Leo offered to come with me, just in case she tries something. But I needed to go alone. It wasn't for him, not really. I felt a strange, morbid need to see the final chapter of his life, to stand in a room with the people who knew him, and to confirm that the ghost that had haunted my life was well and truly gone. The funeral home was opulent, all dark wood and hushed velvet carpets, a world away from the simple, honest life I knew. I felt like an intruder, my off-the-rack suit a cheap imitation of the tailored grief worn by the other mourners. I didn't know a single person. I stood in the back, a spectator at the closing ceremony of a life I was never invited to be a part of. I saw her across the room. Brenda. She was exactly as I'd pictured her. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, expensive black dress, a string of pearls at her throat. She was holding court, accepting condolences with a practiced, sorrowful grace. Then her eyes swept the room and landed on me. For a split second, her mask of grief slipped, revealing a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. She excused herself and moved towards me, a shark gliding through water. I braced myself. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. What she did was far worse. She came right up to me, her voice a low, venomous whisper meant only for me, but loud enough for the couple next to me to shift uncomfortably. "How dare you show your face here?" she hissed, her smile a tight, ugly thing. "What? Did you come to measure the casket for a price?" I clenched my jaw, my hands balling into fists in my pockets. "I came to pay my respects," I said, my voice dangerously calm. She let out a soft, contemptuous laugh. "Respects? You were nothing to him. A mistake from a past he spent 20 years trying to forget." Her eyes narrowed, gleaming with malice. She leaned in closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. "Don't dishonor his memory by being greedy now. The people here, we were his family. You were just an inconvenience." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, dipped in poison. She was trying to unmake me, to reduce me to a grubby, money-hungry stranger. She was trying to reinforce the one question that had tormented my life, that I wasn't worth it. I looked over her shoulder at the polished casket at the front of the room. I looked back at her cold, hateful eyes. The last flickering ember of any complicated feeling I might have had for my father died out. In its place, a cold, hard certainty settled in. "I'll see you in court, Brenda," I said, my voice so low and steady it surprised even me. I turned and walked out of the funeral home, leaving her standing there amidst the scent of lilies and hypocrisy. I didn't look back. The air outside was cold and clean, and I took a deep breath. The fight wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. It was about proving to her and to myself that I was not an inconvenience. I was his son, and I was coming for what was mine. The weeks that followed the funeral were a war of paper and postage. Aggressive letters flew back and forth between Uncle Mike and Brenda's high-priced city lawyer. They contested everything. They demanded proof of paternity. They filed motions to delay, to drain my resources, to wear me down. It was a classic strategy: bully the little guy until he breaks. But the assault wasn't just legal. It was personal. One evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my older brother, Daniel. Dan had left home the day he turned 18, eager to escape our small town and the suffocating weight of our family struggles. He'd built a life for himself on the other side of the country, a life that rarely included phone calls home. "Caleb," he said, his voice strained. I heard about Dad. A little late, aren't you?" I said, the bitterness surprising me. "Yeah, well, listen, I got a call. From Brenda." Of course he did. She was turning over every stone, looking for any leverage she could find. "She told me what's going on," Dan continued, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice. "With the inheritance." "Caleb, what are you doing?" "I'm claiming what's mine, Dan." He sighed a long, weary sound. "Man, just let it go. It's not worth the drama. You're stirring things up for everyone. It's messy." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "You ran away from this family once, Dan," I said, my voice cold. "You ran away from all the mess. You don't get to call me from your clean, comfortable life and tell me how to fight for what's left of it. That's not fair," he shot back. "No, it's not," I said. "Neither is a stranger trying to steal $500,000 from me and Grandma. I'm not backing down." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. The call left a sour taste in my mouth. It wasn't enough that I was fighting Brenda. Now I felt like I was fighting the ghost of my own fractured family, too. The isolation felt immense. I was an island, with Grandma being the only other inhabitant, and the sharks were circling. I threw myself into my work, the physical labor a welcome distraction. The rhythmic motion of planing a piece of wood, the concentration needed for a difficult joint. It was the only time my mind went quiet. I was in the workshop late one night when Leo showed up, his face grim. "Mike called me," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "He told me they're trying to say you're not his son." "That's low, man. That's scumbag level." I just shook my head, continuing to sand the edge of a board. "It's just a tactic. It's more than a tactic, it's a threat, he said, his voice rising. She's trying to erase you. You gotta hit back, man. Harder. I stopped sanding and looked at him, the exhaustion of the last few weeks pressing down on me. And how do I do that, Leo? I'm just a guy with a workshop. She's got a team of lawyers and a bottomless bank account. You've got the truth, he said simply. And you've got Uncle Mike. Don't you dare give up. I looked around my workshop, at the tools my grandfather had passed down to me, at the projects I was building with my own two hands. This was my truth. I wasn't going to let anyone take it, or anything else from me. The pressure was getting to me. The legal battle was a constant, draining hum in the background of my life. Sleep offered little escape. My dreams filled with faceless lawyers and the sound of Brenda's condescending laugh. One Saturday, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't work, couldn't think. I needed to do something, anything, to feel like I was in control. So, I decided to clean out the workshop. It was a task I've been putting off for years. The place was cluttered with decades of memories and half-forgotten projects. I was ruthless. Old paint cans, rusted tools, scraps of wood too small to be useful. I tossed it all into a growing pile for the dump. I was trying to purge the space, to purge my mind. My anger fueled me. I was angry at Brenda, at Daniel, and my father for leaving this god-awful mess in his wake. High up in the dusty rafters, tucked away in a dark corner, was a moldy cardboard box. I remembered Grandpa putting it up there ages ago. Old memories, he'd grunted. Probably just old tax records or something. It was garbage. I climbed a ladder, coughing in the thick dust, and yanked the box down. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it over to the trash pile, and in my frustration, didn't just drop it. I threw it down. The brittle cardboard, weakened by age and damp, split open upon impact. Its contents spilled onto the dusty concrete floor. Not old records. Letters. Stacks and stacks of letters, bundled together with crumbling rubber bands. I stared at them, my breath catching in my throat. They were all addressed to me, in care of my grandparents. The return address was from a city I'd never been to. The handwriting was a man's scrawl I didn't recognize. My father's. But it was the bright red ink stamped across the front of every single envelope that made the world tilt on its axis. On every letter, the same 2 words, returned to sender. I knelt down, my knees cracking on the hard floor, and picked one up. The postmark was from 20 years ago. I was 8 years old when he'd sent this. I picked up another. 15 years ago. Another. 10. They spanned more than a decade. He had tried to write to me. Again and again. And I never knew. My first reaction wasn't sadness or hope. It was a wave of pure, cynical disgust. More lies. What kind of sentimental garbage was in these envelopes? Pathetic excuses? Empty promises? I almost swept them up and threw them in the trash. It was the past. It was poison. But I couldn't. My hands were shaking as I untied one of the brittle bundles. The rubber band snapped and crumbled into dust. The letters felt fragile, ancient. Relics from a life I never had. With a sense of dread, I pulled the first letter from its envelope. The paper was yellowed with age. My heart hammered against my ribs as I unfolded it and began to read. The letters were not what I expected. They weren't grand apologies or self-pitying monologues. They were hesitant, awkward. The words of a man who didn't know how to be a father, trying to reach across a chasm he himself had created. Dear Caleb, the first one began. You're 8 now. I bet you're getting big. I saw a kid at the park today playing baseball, and it made me think of you. I hope you're happy. I hope they're taking good care of you. I read on, my cynicism slowly being eroded by a strange, confusing mix of emotions. He wrote about his job, about the weather, about a dog he'd gotten. Simple, mundane things. But woven between the lines was a current of deep, undeniable regret. Then I got to a letter written when I was 12. I know I messed up, son. I was young and stupid and scared. I'm sending a check for your birthday in this card. It's not much, but I hope your grandparents can use it to get you something good. Maybe that new kind of bike all the kids have. I stared at the words. A check? I never received a check. I'd never gotten a birthday card. I tore through the other letters, my hands growing more frantic. Another one for my 16th birthday. Enclosed is a check for $500. I heard you're a good student. Maybe this can help you save for a car or for college. Another, a year later. Things are going well at work. I'm putting some money aside for you. I hope one day I can give it to you myself. He had tried. He hadn't just written words. He had tried to send money. Support. He had tried to be a father in the only clumsy, distant way he knew how. And none of it had ever reached me. Every letter, every check, every hope had been sent back, intercepted by an invisible wall. But it wasn't invisible. It had a name. Brenda. The full, horrifying reality of it crashed down on me. This wasn't just a woman trying to protect her inheritance after his death. This had been going on for decades. She had actively, systematically, and maliciously kept him from me. She had curated his life, building a wall of silence around him, ensuring his past could never touch his present. She hadn't just been his wife. She had been his warden. The anger I felt was a new kind. It was white-hot and immense. It was for the boy who thought his father had forgotten him completely. It was for the teenager who struggled, thinking he was all alone. But beneath, it was another, more complicated feeling. A new anger, directed at the ghost in the casket. I was angry at him for being so weak, for being so easily manipulated, for letting this woman build a cage around him and throw away the key. He had tried, yes, but he hadn't tried hard enough. He had let her win. He had let her erase me. And in the end, his weakness had been just as damaging as his initial act of leaving. I gathered the letters, my hands steady now, with a cold, absolute purpose. This changed everything. This wasn't a dispute over money anymore. This was about exposing a lie 20 years in the making. The meeting was held in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm downtown. The air was thick with tension. On one side of the massive mahogany table sat Brenda and her smug, expensive lawyer. On the other side sat me, Uncle Mike, and a stack of yellowed letters. Brenda looked at me with disdain, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she had me on the ropes. She thought this was the meeting where I would finally cave to their lowball settlement offer. Her lawyer started talking, droning on about the costs of litigation, the emotional toll, the wisdom of putting this all behind us. I didn't listen. I just watched Brenda. When he was finally done, Uncle Mike didn't respond to the offer. He simply slid a single, plastic-sleeved letter across the table. "Mrs. Morrow," he said, his voice calm and even. "Could you please identify the handwriting on this envelope? Postmarked 19 years ago." Brenda glanced at it. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then pure panic flashed across her face. Her lawyer snatched it up. "What is this?" he demanded. "It's a letter," Mike said, "from the deceased to his son, Caleb. One of many, all of which, curiously, were returned to sender." He then placed a second file on the table. "And these are bank statements showing checks written to Caleb Morrow that were never cashed, and deposit slips showing similar amounts being deposited into a private account held by your client, Brenda, a few weeks later." The color drained from Brenda's face. Her lawyer's smug expression dissolved into open-mouthed shock as he riffled through the evidence. The room was utterly silent, save for the rustle of paper. This is a misunderstanding," Brenda stammered, looking at her lawyer, her voice thin and reedy. "Is it?" Uncle Mike pressed, his voice like flint. "Is it a misunderstanding that for nearly 2 decades you systematically intercepted your husband's mail? That you likely committed mail fraud and forgery? This is no longer a simple inheritance dispute, Brenda. This is a criminal matter." That's when she broke. The mask of the grieving, powerful widow shattered into a million pieces. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with ragged, ugly sobs. "I had to," she choked out, her voice muffled by her hands. "I had to protect us." She looked up, her makeup smeared, her eyes wild with desperation. She looked right at me. "You don't understand. I grew up eating scraps. I remember nights when dinner was just a slice of bread. One slice. When he found me, he didn't just give me a home. He gave me a life. He made me feel safe for the first time in my life." Tears streamed down her face. "He was always talking about you. The son he left behind. The ghost. I was so terrified he would leave me and go back to you. You were the threat to that safety. I couldn't let you back in." I couldn't lose everything. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hatred. I just felt a vast, weary pity. I saw a woman so traumatized by her own past, so terrified of being poor and alone again, that she had become a monster. She had built her beautiful life on a foundation of lies and fear, and now it was all crumbling around her. I had won. The war was over, but there was no triumph in it, only the bitter taste of ashes. The settlement wasn't a settlement. It was a surrender. Faced with undeniable evidence of fraud, Brenda gave up everything. The court awarded me the entirety of my father's estate, with a portion set aside to cover the legal storm she now faced. I never saw her again. I walked out of that conference room and into the rest of my life. There was no victory parade, no surge of elation, just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a quiet sense of release, like a muscle that had been clenched for 28 years had finally gone limp. The first thing I did was pay off the mortgage on my grandmother's house. I'll never forget the look on her face when I showed her the paperwork. She didn't cry. She just put her hand over her mouth and sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of decades of financial worry lifting from her shoulders in one silent moment. She retired from her cleaning jobs the next day. Seeing her finally able to sit on the porch in the middle of the day, reading a book with a cup of tea, was better than any amount of money in the bank. I invested the rest, setting up a trust for her that would ensure she'd be comfortable for the rest of her days, and using the remainder to finally put my own business on solid ground. I hired a couple of guys, bought the new equipment I'd always dreamed of, and started taking on bigger, better jobs. A few months passed. The seasons changed. Life went on. The raw, gaping wound of the past was still there, but it wasn't infected anymore. It was beginning to scar over. One cool autumn evening, Leo stopped by the workshop. I wasn't working on a job for a client. I was working on something for myself, for my grandmother. It was a jewelry box, crafted from a beautiful piece of walnut wood, its grains swirling like a topographic map. I was meticulously sanding the edges, my movements slow and deliberate. Leo leaned against the doorframe, watching me for a while. The workshop was cleaner now, more organized. It was the space of a man who was building, not just struggling. "She's going to love that," he said quietly. I nodded, not looking up from my work. "I hope so." He was silent for another moment. Then he said, "You know, the money's great." "It is. But the best part." I finally looked up at him. He smiled a real, knowing smile. "The best part is you can finally stop running from him." The words settled in the quiet space between us, true and clear. He was right. All my life, I had been running from my father's ghost, the ghost of his failure, his weakness, his absence. I had defined myself in opposition to him, but I wasn't running anymore. I looked down at the box in my hands. It was sturdy. It was beautiful. It was something I had made with my own two hands, an act of creation and love. It wasn't a frantic effort to prove I wasn't him. It was just me. A small smile touched my lips, the first one in a long time that felt truly light, truly free. I had my own foundation now, built not on ashes and anger, but on solid ground. And it was strong enough to hold anything.